Okay. Well, this week on Versus, I've been saying for the last several days that we're going to go gangster. Not gangsta, gangster. And this won't be the last time we go gangster in Versus. Trust me, there's one major one coming up very soon.
In case that's the one you were thinking, yes, that one will happen soon.
Yes, very, very soon. But you actually got a hold of me a while back and said you wanted to do this one. This wasn't even something we planned. It was just something we wanted to do The Departed against something, and we had something else in mind. And then you decided to throw State of Grace into this. So we're going to find out what happens when The Departed battles State of Grace. AJ, take it away.
Alright. I think we're going to start with State of Grace. State of Grace is actually, somewhat inspired by, the true story of an Irish gang called the Westies, I think they were called. And the story basically follows, Terry Noonan, who is Sean Penn. And he's coming back to Hell's Kitchen after having been away for a while. We don't know where he's been at first. He just mysteriously comes back. And the big crime family that was in charge when he left is now headed by Frankie Flannery, who is Ed Harris. And Ed Harris's trigger-happy younger brother, Jackie, who is Gary Oldman, who is Terry's best friend. So they've all known each other like their entire lives. The only difference now is that Frankie is the big boss now. And then there's a story about how he fell in love with their sister, who's played, of course, by Robin Wright. I don't know if this is how they came to be or if it was before this or what, but... and, of course, we learn, obviously, since we go from beginning to end in Versus, and you should know by now that it's spoilery, it's revealed halfway through the movie that Terry is actually an undercover cop. And that's where he has been this whole time. So, and that's where our story takes on. It's a little less than halfway in, but they keep it a secret for what seems like a long time. Even though if you read the synopsis on the back of the case, it's right there. And the first thing you have to talk about when you talk about this movie is the performances and the cast list. There's some people here that weren't big at the time that are now, and then the obvious familiar faces, and a veteran actor as well. Since this is, even though he's not the main character, I guess since he's the one everybody immediately jumps to when they talk about this movie, I will go ahead and start with the character of Jackie, who is Gary Oldman. This is oftentimes praised as one of his best performances and one of his most underrated. Probably underrated mostly because a lot of people I know don't even know the movie exists really until I show it to them or tell them about it. I'll get to why not many people know what it is in a minute, but the character of Jackie is totally insane, and Gary Oldman, as usual, goes all out. One of Jackie's first scenes, we are introduced to just how crazy his character is when he tells us the story of how one day, he got tired of throwing all of his favorite guns in the ocean after he killed somebody. So he decided he was going to put different fingerprints on the gun after every crime. And this is accomplished by the 2 severed hands he keeps in his freezer. Just like nothing. Because he and Terry have met back up. It's been years since they've seen each other. They're catching up. They're having a great time. A lot of hugging and laughing and all that. And they're standing in front of this refrigerator, just getting beer out of it, and just very casually, he's like, "Hey Terry, you want to see something?" And he just opens the freezer, and there they are. And then he plays with them, and he does, his character's so insane, he's one of those characters that does a lot of cackling after he does something. There's something he does that he likes to call the 100-yard dash, I think, where, you know, generally in gangster movies, there's going to come a time where you have to burn a building down. So you douse it with gasoline, you get outside, you light something, you throw it in the building, and you drive off. What Jackie likes to do is the 100-yard dash, where he douses the building in gasoline, stands in the middle of it, and lights the match and throws it down and tries to run out of the building before he burns to death.
Wow.
Just for the rush. But he's a great character because he's got a lot of emotional peaks. There's a particular scene, I think it's the scene he's most talked about for with this movie, is the scene where John C. Reilly's been killed, who he was really close with. So he goes to the church and he's completely intoxicated, and he's try to imagine a drunk Gary Oldman praying and think about how it turns out in a church. The scene where he talks about how he's going to make Stevie a saint, and it's a really sad scene, and he really owns it, and he's able to just go back and forth between you really sympathize for him, but at the same time you know how much of a crazy asshole he is. But you also know how good he can be when you see like how good of friends he and Terry are and stuff like that, even if he's a psychotic criminal. And now that we've had that, I'll talk about Sean Penn, who is I don't praise him as much here as I did in Mystic River, obviously, but he does kind of get overshadowed by the flashiness of Gary Oldman, but he's still that really, that really raw, angry performance, and he doesn't really go as like over the top as DiCaprio does, basically playing the same part in The Departed, but he keeps his cool a little more, but he's got that intensity lurking inside him that occasionally wants to come out, and he's got that. He basically doesn't care. He'll basically even though he's an undercover cop, it really doesn't faze him to act like a criminal. And then the great scene at the end when he reveals himself to Frankie, when he says, he's basically saying, I was there when you killed Jackie, and then Frankie says, they're at Jackie's funeral. And Frankie says, you're really stupid. You just are just so stupid for doing this. And Terry says, do you want to know how stupid I am? This is how stupid I am. And he hands him his badge and walks out. And that leads into the final showdown, which we'll get to in time. I now want to talk about Ed Harris. Ed Harris rocks in this movie. He is obviously, he's kind of on the opposite end of Gary Oldman, because he's the older brother, he has to be the responsible one, and he's the one in charge, so he's a little more downplayed. But he's just as, if not more, insane. There's the scene where he has to kill John C. Reilly, obviously. He's never, done a hit in his life. But he's got that, he approaches it with that really, Ed Harris is certainly threatening in many movies, but he doesn't really have a threatening look about him most of the time. So when he approaches Stevie, he basically, Stevie's just wondering what's going on. And because Stevie doesn't believe that Frankie would kill him, because they've known each other for so long, and he's been, taken out for so many times, and Stevie is fucked up enough to where Frankie basically could have killed him at any time now and still hasn't. So Stevie basically feels safe with Frankie. He feels safe arguing with him and having an attitude with him. He thinks he'll be fine. Well, they take Stevie out behind the bar, they get him on the ground and they hold him down. And without even changing facial expressions, really, or emotion, Frankie just takes out the knife and says, well, Stevie, I should warn you, I've never really done a hit like this before, so this might be a little messy. And he just does it. He just cuts his throat like that. And really thinks nothing of it. And that's the point in the movie where you realize that that's basically when Frankie becomes the villain of the movie. Because for a while, they're all friends. And sooner or later, Terry's just going to have to buckle down and do something, but it's at this point in time that Frankie's the hardcore villain that has to be taken down. Bill Pullman actually had the part before Ed Harris did. And apparently he and the director couldn't work it out. Which makes sense, because I can't imagine anybody but Ed Harris in this part. In this particular time when the movie was made, I can't imagine anybody but Ed Harris in that part. He did it perfectly. the big reveal that Terry as an undercover cop comes with, it's a really nice reveal too. At the very beginning of the movie, he and his little accomplice are doing a drug deal with John Turturro. And a shootout happens and Turturro is killed immediately. In a very fishy, the camera angles are a little fishy, so you know something might be up. Well, he and Jackie are hanging out at a cop's funeral. They're just hanging out in the cemetery and there's a cop's funeral going on. Lo and behold, one of the pallbearers at this cop's funeral in a cop uniform is John Turturro, and it was all set up at the beginning. Terry shot blanks at him and they made it look like he was killed. So Turturro from then on basically plays the cop that he meets up with in secret and basically is the one that has to push him to, you know, find evidence and get everything they need and to put Frankie away as soon as possible. Now, there is one thing that kind of... Well, actually, no, I'll go into one more thing here real quick. The veteran actor who has one scene as a very key witness, who saw Stevie brought out of the bar and killed, is Burgess Meredith. He's one of those old guys where he sits in his apartment all day and he eats tomatoes out of a can and he doesn't see anything, but it just happens on this night he saw John C. Reilly dragged out of the bar and had his throat slit. And even though he's old and he's seen everything, he can remember all the way back to everything, up to and including every detail of everything he witnesses. So that's a brief scene, but he makes the most of it. And it's always great to see, you know, an actor like that, just even in a cameo part like that. Okay. The one thing that kind of slows this movie down for me, I feel like I'm talking about Emily Blunt and Looper again. It's not Robin Wright's performance at all. It's basically just the existence of the character. The whole side plot, I don't even think really needs to be here. The only way this subplot matters with him being in love with their sister is that, obviously since he's in love with her, eventually the time comes where he confesses to her that he's a cop, and she's the only one that knows besides, you know, the other cops. So that gives her a dilemma that they could have explored, but they don't really. And pretty much every time she comes in and they have a scene together, it's kind of like the movie just kind of halts the nice thing it's got going. Like I said, she's good in it. Her performance is good. It's just I don't think the character really needs to be part of the story, but you gotta have a love story, I guess. Like I said, they could have done a lot more with it, like her dilemma of, you know, does she tell her brothers or not, but they never really go into that. There's a really funny scene that I don't think was supposed to be on purpose, where she gets a really big scene where she goes on a big tirade about, you know, you're a cop and and she has this big speech that she delivers really well. It's a really good scene for her. And then she's about to leave angrily, and she goes to slam the door, and for a split second she gets her arm caught in the door, and then she just, I don't think it was supposed to be in there, but I guess the director just thought it was humorous. So there's that. There's a lot of really great memorable scenes, like on top of the church scene, there's a scene where the main plot of the story is, what Terry has to stop here is Frankie is going to merge with this Italian boss, and basically once that happens, all hell's going to break loose in Hell's Kitchen, of course. So there's this scene where they're under the impression, Frankie's paranoid that maybe possibly this meeting with the Italian gangster could be a hit. So he says, Jackie and Terry and all of them are waiting in this, like, empty room with just a phone in it. And Frankie says, you know, if I call you, it's going down. So, or no, if I call you, it's not going down. There's a whole confusion about that, because they're waiting for the call, and then Terry and Jackie get into a long argument about, did he say he was going to call if it was going down or it wasn't going down? I don't remember. And then Jackie just says, fuck it, we're going. And Jackie's prepared to kill. Because he's under the impression that no phone call means something went wrong. And there's this really great scene where they build it up. Obviously nothing happens because there wasn't a hit prepared, but... and it gets stopped at just the right minute, but... there's this great scene where they build up for what could have been a bloodbath, where Ed Harris has this great delivery, where they all go outside, and he hasn't heard from Jackie, and Jackie's nowhere to be seen. And Frankie just looks around and says, okay, either they totally forgot about us, or this whole neighborhood better fucking duck. And Jackie and the whole gang are like right up on them when Frankie hugs the guy to confirm, don't worry, it's not a hit, run away. That's a really great scene. There's this really, the scene where Frankie kills Jackie is really heartbreaking, for two reasons. Number one, because, basically, obviously Jackie is not aware that Frankie's the one that killed Stevie. And because Frankie's his brother, he would refuse to believe it anyway. But Terry brings up what Burgess Meredith told him and said, I have reason to believe that Frankie may have killed Stevie. That's just what I heard. I'm not saying it's true, that's just what I heard. Jackie freaks out, starts screaming, and puts a gun in Terry's face and says, Frankie's my brother and you're fucking lying. I don't care who you heard it from. Never, ever say that again. And after all this, at the last minute, Jackie learns the truth. And it's this... Oh, it's really hard to watch because Jackie's supposed to meet up with Frankie. And they meet up, and Jackie talks about what went down. And of course, you know, Jackie absolutely refuses to believe Frankie will do any wrong because Frankie's his older brother. Refuses to believe that he'd kill Stevie, one of his best friends. And Frankie pulls a gun out and points it at him. And Gary Oldman has this look on his face that says everything as, oh my god, Terry was right. My brother killed Stevie. And oh my god, my brother's about to kill me. And then Frankie shoots him dead. And it's a really heartbreaking scene after everything Jackie went through to defend Frankie for him. Now there's a lot of, and of course, the great ending. The great ending we've been building up to. It's probably one of my favorite shootouts I've ever seen anyway. A lot of it's in slow-mo, but not in a tacky way. We have the Thanksgiving Day parade happening, and all of Frankie's guys are waiting in the bar. And Terry's plan is to go in there single-handedly and kill every single one of them because of what happened to Jackie. So, and the great thing about it is it's not outlandish either, because it isn't just Terry going in there and shooting everybody. Everybody's shooting back at him. So, Terry does get hit a couple of times, and then there's this fantastic scene where it's the showdown between Terry and Frankie. And in any other movie, it would seem really cliche and hokey, but we have Terry behind the bar, and we have Frankie whose gun is loaded, and Terry has one bullet left. You've heard this set up in a billion movies, of course, but the way they do it, you have Frankie pointing the gun at Terry. Terry is standing up, pointing the gun at him, the gun that only has one bullet in it, and he's basically just walking into Frankie's bullets. Like, he's just walking towards Frankie with his one bullet gun while Frankie is firing the whole load at him. And he is getting hit in critical places, but he keeps walking anyway. And then he and Frankie get right up on each other, and Frankie's out of bullets, and Terry puts the one he has through his head. And then, I don't know that this movie exactly needed an ambiguous ending, but it's not a bad ending at all. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying it didn't maybe need to do this. The last shot of the movie is Terry sitting down after he's killed Frankie. And it just ends there. I assume we're supposed to think that he's gonna die, because he got shot a lot in that shootout. But the movie, I guess, did not want us to worry about it. So, yeah, it's got a lot of great things going on. Ennio Morricone did the score. The guy that did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in the Tarantino movies. It's a really great score, too. A lot of people complain about the length. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes. Apart from the Robin Wright stuff, I think the pacing is actually really well done. I don't think it feels 2 hours and 15 minutes. Now, here's the issue. There is a reason not many people know about this movie or have seen this movie. Sadly, it got a little bit overshadowed. State of Grace came out Friday, September 14th of 1990. The following Wednesday, Goodfellas came out. And it got buried. It got good reviews. It didn't get great reviews, but it got good reviews. But 5 days or so later, Goodfellas came out. Not exactly the best competition to have.
No.
So, basically, and I guess, it got bombarded with, criticisms like saying, State of Grace is really good, but it's no Goodfellas. Like, at the time, all the reviews said that. All they wanted to do was compare it to Goodfellas. There's a reason I'm not. I would be, but, But, yeah, it's a great actor's movie, because it's got all the performances in it are like the big showy performances, but in a good way. And the roles themselves, it's powerful, it's violent, it's suspenseful, and it was one of the best movies of 1990. 1990 was just a whole gangster craze, because you had this, you had Goodfellas, you had Godfather 3, and you had Dick Tracy all out this year. But yeah, I'm wondering what the consensus on it would be if it wasn't so close to Goodfellas like that. See, I'd say it was top 5 of 1990. And 1990 is a pretty good year.
Yeah.
However, in 2006, we got The Departed, which was Scorsese's latest at the time. And finally got him his Oscar. And amazingly also won Best Picture, just to, make the greatness even more so. Probably one of the best decisions the Academy ever made was giving The Departed Best Picture. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The Departed starts with an 18-minute opening before we even see the title. Basically, where we're introduced to Frank Costello, who is this racist, psychopathic gangster. He's dropping racial slurs in the opening narration. Multiple ones. Different ones. This guy sets himself up to basically be the villain of the movie. Even though, despite popular belief, he's not. And he basically takes under his wing Colin, who is the little kid just sitting at the diner who is by himself and he's poor, and he's an altar boy. But Frank knows his family, so he offers him, comic books and food and everything, and sends him on his way, and then says, why don't you come work for me? And from that point on, Colin grows up to become a criminal under Frank's wing. And then there's that interesting cut where we see young Colin's face, and then suddenly he is Matt Damon in police training. So we know that he's working undercover for Frank. And then we meet Billy, who is DiCaprio, who's on the other side of things. His family was already in, the criminal world, and he was basically trying to get out of it, so he's becoming a cop to do so, even though he was kicked out of the academy for anger management issues. Something about a chair. And naturally, these two will be our enemies for the movie. Because Queenan and Dignam, who are Martin Sheen and Mark Wahlberg, enlist him to go undercover with Frank's gang. So naturally these two are going to cross paths because one is informing for one and one's informing for the other while posing as what the other one is. Which obviously is a remake of Infernal Affairs, of course. which I was initially gonna do with it, but doing a movie against this remake seemed a little redundant. So I will say though, I do think this tops Infernal Affairs a lot. Number one, it's almost an hour longer, and also because that 1 hour is actually used to bring more depth to everything. Like, Infernal Affairs is basically a straight crime movie, but everyone in The Departed has something going on. Let's go one at a time. There's been a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk, and there still is today when people look back on it now. There's a lot of people that believe DiCaprio is hugely overacting in this. And I can see where they're coming from, but I don't agree with it. Because he's basically constantly throughout the movie out of his mind. And basically, doing anything that an overactor would do. But I think given the circumstances and the fact that the movie drops it on us eventually, that there's no really passage of time that we see. It's just, we see the movie happening, and then after a while we get a scene where he says, I've been doing this for a year and I've had enough. So we have no idea what all he's been witness to. We do see a lot of the horrible things he's witnessed. Like the way Mr. French can just off somebody for nothing. Like the scene where he gets the duck thrown at him. And just casually, French walks in with the plastic bottle and dumps it out and says, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. Just shoots the guy on the head right in front of Billy. And thinks nothing of it. I'd say DiCaprio's, like I said, I haven't been in a circumstance where I spend a year watching people get brutally murdered and having to pass myself off as somebody I'm not. But I think I'd probably be as out of my head, too. And and plus, his character is built up from the get-go that he's that hothead character that just can't, control his emotions. That's why he got kicked out of the academy for beating somebody with a chair or whatever happened. Now, here's the interesting thing. Everybody you talk to will tell you the villain of this movie is Frank Costello. I think it's abundantly clear the villain of this movie is Colin Sullivan. Basically from beginning to end. And that's actually proven at the end with something subtle, but I'll get to that. The interesting thing they do with Colin here is, number one, it's awesome that he is the main villain of this movie, but the way he is written is so perfect that nobody thinks about that. Everybody sees Nicholson doing the over-the-top thing as Costello, and their villainy detectors just immediately go to him. They're not on Colin at all. It's almost like Colin, deceived the audience the way he deceives everybody else in the movie. So, they even give him a love story. He has the love story with Madeline, with Vera Farmiga, as his, she's the therapist of Billy. And they just meet in an elevator at random one day. And eventually they go on a date and then they're living together. Even when he's with Madeline, just that insincerity we know is in his character is just shining through. He's just so fucking weaselly, and Damon plays it so perfectly. And while we're on the subject of Colin, I might as well go ahead and bring up the big theory. Because fan theories are fun, as we like to say. Surely by now, every fan of The Departed has heard the theory about how Colin Sullivan is gay. And closeted. Because, let's start with the firefighters scene. Where they're playing the game with the firefighters, and then the game ends, and the firefighters have won. So Colin's instinct is to say, fuck you, you fucking queers, it's firemen getting pussy for the first time in the history of firemen or pussy. And then he says, go save a kitten in a tree, you fucking homos. He's really driving in the queer and homo thing, he's very insecure about something. And then when he and Berrigan are sitting on the beach and he's looking, or at the bench, and he's looking at the Capitol building, it's not even provoked, and he just says, those firefighters are a bunch of homos. Obviously he's really insecure about something regarding that. Yeah. Now, I don't really buy into this one, but it's something else a lot of people thought. I'm thinking it's about, where he wants to be in life and where he wants his success to go, but a lot of people like to talk about the fact that his fixation with the Capitol building, there's so many scenes where we just see Colin watching the Capitol building. This is one of those scenes. And then when he's buying his apartment. I guess some people have the theory that he's fascinated by the Capitol building because of the phallic symbol. I don't get that, but but then there's the scene later when he and Madeline are obviously having trouble intimately. Like she's saying, you know, they just refer to, you know, like last night, and he doesn't want to talk about it, and then the symbolism where it's almost like to mock him, she starts eating a banana. And then he says, I have to go to work, and he leaves. And of course the scene where he's buying the apartment, and the guy asks him if he's going to be alone or if, you know, he's living with somebody, and it's almost like the guy's going to ask him out or something, like he's setting the guy's gaydar off. But of course the movie never outright says that, but obviously all these things have made that theory to... And I guess you can say it's kind of a self-deception thing as well if he's closeted. Because, you know, that's all Colin Sullivan does with his entire life, from his childhood to now, is just deceive people. That's his whole life. So self-deception, I don't think, would be out of the realm of possibility. If you want to explore the character that far. We can talk about Costello a little more, because this character is so insane. It's to my understanding, most of Costello is Nicholson ad-libbing. Like I said, after we get the racial slurs and that, another one of his introductions is when he's plugging the people on the beach. That they're getting ready to cut up, but he kills them execution style from behind. And he kills the guy and he lands face first, and then he shoots the woman and she kind of falls sideways and lands on the guy. And his response is, she felt funny. And then he starts to cackle. Even French says, Francis, you need to see somebody. As French is about to cut their bodies up. But the thing is despite all of this, he's obviously still extremely respected. Because he does, like, the way he, you know, takes Colin in and, you know, pays for everything and does all that. He's got the girlfriend Gwen that's just there, that he basically is there for him to ridicule. There's the relationship between him and Billy, which is interesting, because the first thing he does, he doesn't ask French to do it or some lackey. He himself takes Billy's own boot and beats his broken hand with it to torture him into saying that he's not a cop. And then he and Billy are the best of friends for the rest of the movie. Even though Billy is deceiving him. And it's very interesting because he tells the story about how, like, Frank actually buckles down and says, you know, if your dad were still alive and he saw me sitting here with you, he would have killed my entire fucking family just to get to me. So he respects Billy's family, so he and Billy kind of have this bond going on. Which I guess really, really adds to Billy's paranoia, because it kind of adds a guilt to it. Because we learn at the end with the tapes and the all the proof about Colin being the mole. When Costello dies, it's Billy that Costello's lawyer goes to. That's how much he trusted him. And so much so that he goes through all the trouble of the guys from Providence that he beat up in the store, and then we're gonna come back and kill him. But Costello went ahead and killed the guys from Providence and blamed it on the guy Jimmy Pappas, and the guy Jimmy Pappas got killed in prison just to shut him up. Went through this whole thing. It's worth noting this movie won the Oscar for editing, which is another one of the most deserved wins I think I've ever seen. And then, of course, there's the extremely crazy side of Costello that has nothing to do with murder or anything. Take the scene, for instance, that was ad-libbed by Nicholson, from what I understand, where, just for shits and giggles, he goes to meet Colin at a porn theater that he owns, and he poses as a guy in a long coat and hat that's pleasuring himself, basically. And just to freak Colin out, he acts like he's going to do something extreme, and instead just puts a giant black dildo in Colin's face. Just for fun. It has nothing to do with the rest of the scene. Not to mention the scene where he goes to the opera with those two women. And then the next scene dissolves, and they're in his bed, and he says, you want some Coke? And he has a giant bowl of Coke next to his bed that he just takes handfuls of and throws at them. And then the line, don't move until you're numb. The guy is clearly insane, but it's Nicholson at his absolute most Nicholson in the best way. And you just can't get enough of it. It's a sad thing when there's still half an hour of the movie left when he dies. Even though the whole movie's still great from then on. Okay, let's talk about... Obviously the movie did very well awards-wise. It won Best Picture and Best Director. Best Adapted Screenplay and Editing. Now, despite the gigantic cast list, it got one acting nomination, which kind of threw people off. Mm-hmm. But to my understanding, Nicholson didn't bother campaigning, and DiCaprio, number one, didn't want to campaign because he thought it was too much of an ensemble, and secondly, he was campaigning for Blood Diamond. So, basically, by default, Mark Wahlberg got nominated. I say by default, there's a lot of people out there that do think he deserved it. And I'm not saying he's bad in it at all, I'm just saying the role doesn't scream Oscar nomination to me.
No.
But he is great. He's basically I would have loved to have seen this. If he wasn't too committed to rescue me, Dennis Leary was supposed to play the part.
Wow.
There were a lot of alternate casting choices. Mel Gibson was supposed to be Ellerby. De Niro was supposed to be Queenan. But Gibson was doing Apocalypto, and I think De Niro was busy doing something. De Niro was busy with The Good Shepherd.
They're both picked the wrong movies.
Yeah. De Niro, I mean, I know he was the director of it, but still, if De Niro was too busy with The Good Shepherd, how is Damon a main character in this movie? And De Niro couldn't play Queenan, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
The character of Dignam is what we're talking about now. He's basically the comedy relief, more or less. It's a Scorsese crime drama, and the Oscar-nominated performance in it is the comedy relief, more or less. He basically gets all the quotable lines and all that. And he does a line that I won't say for offensive purposes, but he has my favorite line in the movie, and it just, what he's saying and his delivery of it just kills me I've seen this movie 50 or 60 or 100 times, and the line kills me every single time. The line starts with, "We would not be good at what we do, would we?" This whole scene in the opening with Queenan's office, where he talks about, this is the kind of character he is. Queenan is complimenting Billy, and Dignam's trying to get to him. Dignam is sitting there with his arms crossed, just glaring at him the whole time, trying to basically shake him. That's the way he is with everybody. He's hate at first sight with Colin. And one of his lines is, Queenan says, "You work hard and you rise fast." And Dignam's addition to that is, "like a 12-year-old's dick." Who fucking says that except Mark Wahlberg?
Exactly.
Now, there's something really interesting going on here. Well, another thing, I actually heard an interesting theory was, I've always been intrigued by the fact, and I'm pretty sure we see this like this on purpose. There's the scene where Billy calls from the airport to talk to Queenan, but Queenan's at a funeral. So Dignam's just hanging out in his office answering the phone. And we kind of see his hand playing with a magnifying glass, and we get a good look at his wedding ring. And that makes you think, who the fuck married Dignam? I heard a theory once that said, maybe Dignam is the way he is because he's one of those guys that he's like this, but when he goes home, he's one of those guys where his wife walks all over him. I always thought that was an interesting theory. Now, here's the really interesting thing that I love about Dignam's character that's fun to kind of watch throughout the movie. I'm pretty sure Dignam knows that Colin is a mole from the get-go. Dignam knows that Colin's bad news from the very first time that he sees him, and he keeps that up through the whole movie. Like, yeah, that was my mistake. The 12-year-old's dick line was actually to Colin, not to Billy. And they're just at it through the whole thing. And they basically, Colin thinks it's a jealousy thing, but I think Dignam knows. He can't prove it, but something inside Dignam knows that something's wrong with Colin. Really, one of the big scenes with that is, it goes by really fast. I don't even know how many people even see it. But there's the scene where they're going to meet about the microprocessors. They're doing the big meeting. And they're going to track them by their phones. So Billy texts Queenan about the phones. So Colin texts Costello, turn your phones off, because that's how they're doing it. So everything goes down, and all the phones go off, and Dignam's throwing a holy shit fit. And they're saying, something went wrong, we got a blind spot. This is the, I'm the guy that does his job, he used to be the other guy line. They're talking about how they lost all the signals. And Dignam's furious. And Colin is just standing there supervising. Colin's not doing anything or saying anything. He's just there to supervise. But when they lose the connection, Dignam walks by, looks right at Colin and says, why the fuck did they turn their phones off? He knows. He can't prove it, but he fucking knows. Because he says, why the fuck did they turn their phones off, like he's just saying it out of frustration, but he looks directly at Colin when he says it. Just in passing when he walks by. And then, of course, there's the scene at the end. Where we're basically talking about the end of Infernal Affairs has a lot more praise for this, because if I remember correctly, Infernal Affairs ends at the funeral. Monahan and Scorsese decided this movie should end with fucking Colin's death, which is, really the best way it could end. That's the best ending you're gonna get, because the fucking weasel has it coming. So that's when we learned that basically we don't know what Dignam's future is. The last time we saw him before this scene, he was on a leave of absence because of Queenan's death. And because he was gonna fucking kill Colin over it, because he knew Colin was responsible for it. Because there was this whole thing where Colin, being the person that he is, tries to sidestep the cops by convincing them that Queenan's the mole. And it ends up getting him killed by Fitzy and Delhaunt. So I do love the scene where, obviously, there's the scene that we don't know what it is, but Billy gives an envelope to Madeline right before he dies and says, if anything happens to me, I need you to make sure this gets to the right place. I think the main assumption is that was an envelope for Dignam with all the evidence in it. And that's how Dignam figured out what he figured out and made the decision that he made. So, yes. While we're on the subject of her, Vera Farmiga is always great. She's magnificent. She's amazing. One of the things I love most about her character here is, normally, like when I was talking about Robin Wright and State of Grace, I was like, we just needed a love story. It was just thrown in there. Because her being, the sister of the brothers had nothing to do with anything. The great thing about Madeline here is she's Colin's girlfriend, and she starts banging Billy. She basically solidifies that without them ever having met once, there's the scene where Billy's waiting for Colin to come out of Queenan's office at the very beginning, but they don't even see each other. Like, Billy sees, like, the back of his head, and Colin doesn't even know he's there, and they just go their separate ways. And they never speak until they're on the phone towards the end of the movie, and then they don't even see each other until they meet at the very end on the roof. But somehow, someway, having never met, these two are enemies in every single way, all the way down to the girl.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a really cool concept. And then, of course, you have, Queenan and Ellerby, who are... Queenan is Martin Sheen, and he does he's the police captain, and he does, the rulings on everything, but he has that soft side to him. He, like, brings Billy into his house and feeds him leftover dinner and tells him about his son, Patrick. And, I wanted it to be, like, a picture of Emilio Estevez or something, but it wasn't. And Ellerby, who is Alec Baldwin, who is fucking incredible in this. Alec Baldwin in this is so fantastic. He's also part of the comedy relief, too. He and Dignam's back and forth is fantastic. The, fuck you, I'm tired from fucking your wife, how's your mother? Because she's tired from fucking my father. I always love the scene where, after, it's the end of that scene, where, Dignam says the line, my theory on feds is they're like mushrooms, feed them shit and keep them in the dark, you girls have a good day, and he leaves. And Ellerby's standing there with the rest of the room, and I always assumed it was an ad, I don't know for sure, but I always thought it was an ad-lib from Alec Baldwin, because he says, normally he's a very nice guy. The laughter you hear almost sounds like laughter from the crew, as opposed to people that are actually in the room. So I always wondered if that's what that actually was, but maybe I'm just wishful thinking. in the line where he's speaking like really fast. He's like really out of it. He's got the pit stains and everything, and he thinks they're getting ready to catch Costello, and he does he offers Colin a cigarette, and he's like, how about a smoke? You want to smoke? Oh, you're one of the straight streets, aren't you? Go fuck yourself. And he just walks away. And the ending of that scene where they lose Costello and everything's gone, and the microprocessors thing didn't work. The microprocessors is a magnificent MacGuffin in this whole movie. So he goes over to security guy who didn't put a camera in the blind spot, and he's just like, can I talk to you for a minute? And then he just throws the guy into the wall and starts to attack him, and they have to pull him away. I didn't catch everything. It ends with he's gonna shove something up his fucking ass. I didn't hear what. And of course, you know, Ray Winstone is Mr. French, who is basically the right-hand man of Costello, and he has the great big scene at the bar where he's the, that's not a guy you can't hit, but that's almost a guy you can't hit. But just to make, you know, things clear, I'm gonna make a fucking ruling on this right now, you don't fucking hit him. And then he makes the what is it, your period remark. And he makes himself out to be this really, and then we see him, you know, slapping the shit out of the guy with the you don't make money, you're a fucking douchebag scene. But for the rest of the movie, French is just kind of there to lingering. But in, like, a good way. Like, I love the scene where he and Billy have already had that altercation. They've had a couple of altercations. They had the one over Jimmy Baggs and knocking his teeth out. So there's the scene where they're in Costello's house, and Billy's just kind of sitting there waiting. Because Frank's outside dealing with the Providence guys. And he looks over, and French is just sitting in a recliner staring at him slowly. And nothing is ever said. And then when he does he has the severed hand, and he says, send this to his wife, and he's trying to get French's attention to get rid of the severed hand, and he has to, like, snap him out of whatever gaze he's in. That's what I love, is, and then we have Fitzy and Delahunt, who are also kind of comedy within, but they're the other guys, like, they played the cop game, where basically anybody that's not paying attention to you is a cop, and everybody that acknowledges you isn't a cop, and the woman that ignores them is the fucking police commissioner. I especially love Fitzy, like with the, after Delahunt dies and they have to dump him in the marsh, and he's like, I don't understand, tell me how they find him so fast. I spent all fucking night putting him in that marsh. And, the interesting subplot with Delahunt, where it's hinted at that he's a cop, the cops, they say on the news that he's a cop, and then Costello says the news is just saying he's a cop, so he'll think of that. But then Delahunt says, you know, you gave me the wrong address, but I showed up at the same one, and then before he can say anything else, he dies, so it's... I guess we're supposed to assume he is, but it's more or less ambiguous whether or not Delahunt was a cop or not, but I think the wrong address thing is supposed to confirm that he is. So even those tiny characters, like, every single character in this movie has a backstory. Even French. French is just kind of there and will beat somebody's ass whenever they need to. And we still get that tiny little backstory, that hilarious scene where he's talking about how reliable he is. And they're talking about his wife, and he's like, I thought she was reliable. And we get this 2-second flashback of him strangling her. We even got French's backstory. And the thing is everything I've mentioned, like I said, all that editing and all these really quick things that they do, like how fast they wrap up the guys from Providence, but how complicated the process is, and how almost every single character, we even get, like, Fitzy's mom is straight out of Going My Way. We know stuff about Fitzy's mom. And then Gwen is just there to be ridiculed by Frank, but then there's the scene where, Colin's just killed Frank, and then she calls him. And Colin answers and says, Frank got shot and we lost him. And we even see we never see her again afterwards. There's no reason to. But we even see her go through heartbreak, learning that Frank died. And she was just like his bang toy. And now let's talk about the ending. And it's magnificent how that's all fit into 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours sounds like a big length.
Nope.
I'm fucking shocked that this movie's 2.5 hours.
It should be at least 3.
It's a mini-series, really.
In essence, yes.
But they compacted it to 2.5 hours flawlessly. It's like a perfect movie. Like I said, the editing is like one of the most deserved Oscar wins for editing I've ever seen. And Monahan's script, too. He, like, concocted all of this. Now, having said that, the big ending. I'm referring to one thing in particular. because I've already talked about Colin's death, of course. This is one of my favorite endings to watch with people.
I agree.
And I'll tell you why. I was thinking about it. It's not just that Billy's the main character, and it's not just that he's played by, you know, Hollywood big person Leonardo DiCaprio. There are a bunch of reasons why it's shocking that Billy just fucking up and dies like that. For starters, you don't see it coming because we don't even see Berrigan. There is no build-up to it whatsoever. It does make you wonder what's at the bottom of the elevator, because it's like, you'd think it would end with him arresting Colin. This is all we're watching them go down the elevator. But no, that's not going through your mind at the time. It's because Brown's going down the other elevator, and they're going to meet up with Brown, they're going to arrest Colin. Everything's going to be wonderful. And then Berrigan's there and just plugs Billy through the damn head and just ends him right there. And then the wonderful bloodbath. I loved the reactions in the theaters after I'd already seen it when Berrigan then kills Brown, then Colin kills Berrigan. I heard one guy in the back the second time I saw it go, "Good Lord," when Berrigan hit the ground.
Turns into Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah. So, here's the thing. This is what's so shocking. It's shocking anyway. If this were any movie, yeah, it'd be a little, whoa, they just killed the main character just like that. So violently, too, and so abruptly. But here's the thing. When I talk about we get the backstory of every character in this movie, think about this. We know every single thing there is to know about Billy. We know him inside and out as if he's a close personal friend.
Mm-hmm.
We see him grieving the loss of his dead mother. We see him by her side watching her die. We see him, you know, fight with his uncle about what's going to happen with the money situation in the funeral. We see him grieving at her funeral. We see him go through police training. We learn that he, you know, he got kicked out of the academy. We see him with we hear about his family history. We know how he spent his weekends because of what Dignam tells us. We see him at the picture at the airport with his dad when he was a kid. We see him with his aunt and cousin at the beginning, where she just makes food for him like she's his grandma. And he goes and he hangs out with Sean. We see him scared for his life. We see him in therapy. We see him fall in love. We see him, it's ambiguous, but we obviously see him possibly be the father of a child. Because, you know, Colin was having troubles. It makes more sense if it was Billy's. We know every single thing about him. And he's just gone like that. The main character of the movie, the hero of the movie, that we knew everything about. We know more about him than we do some of the greatest heroes in movie history.
Mm-hmm.
And like that, I think that's, you taking all of that into account is what makes it so shocking in the long run. It's not just that he was the main character and that he's played by DiCaprio, because DiCaprio dies all the time, even when he's the hero, but it's because of how well we've gotten to know the character throughout the course of the movie. We know everything about him. So, watching his so extremely abrupt death after all of this, just as this was all about to end for him, he had the chance to walk away, but he accidentally found the envelope and just had to put Colin down, and that's what ended him. He was getting ready to go home with his money. And that's what makes it depressing. Now, I wanted to talk about this, about the sleaziness of Colin's character. This was pointed out to me. I would love to have pointed this out myself, but it was pointed out to me around the time it first came out. You'll notice the same prayer bookends this movie. Because it starts and ends with a funeral. It starts with Billy's mom's funeral, and it ends with Billy's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same prayer. And basically the theory is that everybody within the confines of this prayer, everybody that dies from the time Billy's mom dies in between to the time Billy dies is all blessed by this prayer. They're basically blessed to heaven or whatever. The only person in the movie, the only major character in the movie that dies outside of the prayer is Colin.
Makes sense.
Because even Costello got it. Fitzy, Delahunt, all of them. And Colin was the only one that died outside of the prayer. That's just how much of a piece of shit he is, or was. and that's why I get some weird looks for this, because we have Taxi Driver, we have Raging Bull, we have Goodfellas, Mean Streets, and so many movies you can think of. Personally, just my personal opinion, I think The Departed is Scorsese's best movie yet. And it's one of my all-time favorite movies, like top 5.
Yep. I knew going into this it was going to be just that.
So, of course, State of Grace stood no chance. But State of Grace was one of the best movies of 1990, which was the year I was born, so that's a bit of a bummer. So always just getting beat by Scorsese's State of Grace, unfortunately. But, nah. So, yes. I would absolutely seek out State of Grace, even though you know everything that happens in it now if you haven't seen it. But still, just to watch it play out is fantastic. And the acting you have to see to believe, especially Oldman. But there's just nothing like The Departed.
Nope.
And it became, like, as soon as it came out, it became like an instant classic, too. So, yes. I'll hail it.
Well, next week, we're going to go into the works of David Fincher. That's going to be your verses for next week. So, any parting words?
That's it.